Chosen one, they're turning on each other because heaven won't let them touch you. While you stayed aligned, unbothered and focused, the pressure meant for you ricocheted back to its source. This isn't karma, this is divine clearance. You are marked off limits, and every attempt to reach you hit a sealed door. Here's where their first massive mistake happened. They interpreted your silence as weakness, because you didn't clap back, didn't retaliate, didn't expose anyone publicly. You seemed like an easy target. They took your calmness as a green light to do whatever they wanted. But what they didn't realize is that heaven doesn't always respond with thunder. Sometimes heaven watches in silence just to see how far people will go when God seems absent from the picture. And oh, they went far. Confidence filled every scheme. Lies rolled off their tongues with ease. They moved like your downfall was guaranteed. The boldness was extreme, too extreme. But here's what's critical to understand. Nothing landed on you. Every scheme fell flat. Every trap they set collapsed under its own weight. The confusion started when nothing worked. And this is where the self-destruction began. Blame started flying in every direction. One person thought another didn't play their assigned part correctly. Someone else got accused of leaking the plan. Suddenly, the focus shifted away from you completely. It became about who to point the finger at for the massive failure. What nobody in that group knew is God had already sealed you off. You weren't just protected, you were spiritually quarantined, untouchable, unreachable, off limits. And heaven put a restriction on your life, like a divine do not disturb sign, hanging over your head. No weapon formed against you could prosper, not because their aim was off, but because the weapons themselves were stripped of power before they even launched. They couldn't see that. All they saw was their effort falling apart, and their egos couldn't take it. When access to you became impossible, they started clawing at each other. Accusations flew, secrets leaked, loyalty crumbled. What was once a united front against you turned into a battlefield of betrayal. The ones who smiled together while plotting against you are now side-eyeing each other like mortal enemies. And here's the truth. The real breakdown didn't happen because you fought back. It happened because you didn't fight at all. Your refusal to play their game forced the spotlight to turn inward, and under that divine spotlight, all the cracks in their alliance got exposed. This isn't just falling apart. This is self-destruction, and it all started when heaven whispered, "You can't touch this one." You were never just a person to them. You were the sacrifice, the one who needed to bleed emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and for some even financially. Hurting you wasn't about petty revenge. It was their twisted form of worship. The way their egos got fed, their status got solidified, and their control got proven. In their thinking, you were the scapegoat, the dumping ground for every unhealed wound and hidden insecurity anyone carried. They believed that if you could be taken down, if your suffering could be witnessed, power would return to them. But there was one major problem. Heaven refused to authorize the ritual. They gathered around like vultures expecting you to be the dead thing. But when your destruction proved impossible, their appetite turned inward on the group. Someone had to take the blame for why the sacrifice didn't burn the way their fantasies demanded. They didn't expect divine interference. Their gossip was ready. Their alliances seemed strong. Their stories had been rehearsed, but none of it worked. You were covered, anointed, untouchable, and that shook everyone to the core. What really drove them mad wasn't just that they failed. It was that you didn't break the way their prayers demanded. You kept showing up with your peace intact, your mind sharp, your spirit unshaken. That kind of strength embarrassed everyone involved. Their heads started turning inward, wondering who messed it up, who didn't go hard enough, who leaked the plan, who caught feelings or hesitated at the last minute. When the plot didn't play out like their imagination demanded, a chain reaction started. The blame game kicked off. Group chats went quiet. Side conversations started brewing. It wasn't just disappointment, it was fury, the kind that doesn't know where to go, so it starts attacking the nearest available target, each other. And slowly but surely, the same unity they used to come after you began collapsing under its own lies. Heaven didn't just block their attack. God turned their altar into a battlefield. The fire they lit to burn you ended up consuming the trust between conspirators. And now, the ones who once stood shoulder to shoulder in wickedness can't even look each other in the eye. The person who coordinated everything is being questioned by everyone else. Followers are claiming they were manipulated. The ones who suggested the harshest tactics are suddenly ghosts, nowhere to be found when accountability shows up. This is what happens when a group bonds over destruction instead of construction. When the target survives, architects start accusing builders. Builders blame planners, and everyone points fingers at whoever first suggested your name. You want to know what's really eating everyone alive. It's not just that they failed, it's that so much time, energy, and social capital got wasted on something that was never going to work. While their obsession over your downfall consumed them, you were building. While they plotted in dark corners, you were growing in the light. While they rehearsed lies, you were walking in truth. And now, when they look around, nothing exists to show for all that effort, except broken relationships with each other. The sacrifice failed, and so did those who tried to perform it, all because God said, "Not this one." And when God draws that line, no amount of human effort, spiritual manipulation, or coordinated attack can cross it. You were marked as protected before they even knew your name, and that protection didn't just shield you, it became the very thing that turned everyone against each other. If this message hits your spirit, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can find it. Listen to what's happening behind closed doors right now. The person who was always the loudest about destroying you is now being called fake by the group. The one who claimed to have inside information about you is being exposed as someone who made it all up for attention. The alliance that seemed so tight is unraveling because it turns out nobody even liked each other. They only tolerated each other long enough to attempt taking you down. Remember how they used to finish each other's sentences when your name came up? How they moved like one organism with a single mission? That's completely gone now. They can't even agree on basic facts anymore. One person remembers the plan one way, another swears it was different, a third is claiming they were never fully involved. The story keeps changing because no solid foundation ever existed to begin with. You're watching something powerful unfold. When relationships get built on what you're against instead of what you're for, an expiration date comes attached. And that date arrives exactly when the thing being opposed proves to be untouchable. No plan existed for what happens if you didn't fall. No backup strategy. No alternative purpose. You were it. And when heaven said not this one, the entire reason for being connected evaporated. People who come together to tear someone down always end up tearing each other apart. That's the law. You weren't just protected. Your protection revealed the weakness in their so-called unity. And that's the irony. They never stood a chance. Not just because God covered you, but because their strength only came when they were standing against someone else. No real bond existed, just a shared mission rooted in envy and offense. Once the mission failed, the mask slipped off. Now trust doesn't exist between anyone. Every word gets questioned, every move, every intention, and the more they turn on each other, the more obvious it becomes. Nobody ever really liked one another to begin with. Their hatred of you simply exceeded their hatred of their own reflections, and now that they're left alone with themselves, the truth is eating them alive. What's beautiful about this is you didn't have to expose anything. Their incompatibility is doing all the work. The same people who swore eternal loyalty can't stand to be in the same room now, and it all fell apart the moment you proved to be unreachable. They assumed their movement was secret, but the whole time you were standing in a divine courtroom, not as the accused, but as the protected. Heaven had already sealed your name, your calling, and your reputation in spiritual law. You weren't just favored. You were filed, recorded, and witnessed by higher jurisdiction. Everything they did to you was being documented. Every lie, every setup, every attempt at sabotage, logged, time-stamped, and waiting for judgment. You didn't even know it at the time, but while they dragged your name through the mud and attempted to pull you into chaos, they were actually dragging themselves into a trial nobody could win. They were convinced they had control. They thought their gossip would be the final verdict. They believed public opinion would be the judge, but none of them knew that heaven had already opened a case file, and you were off limits by decree. Every conversation they had about you has been recorded. Every plan they made is documented. Every lie they told is time-stamped. And the wildest part, they're presenting evidence against each other. One person is revealing what another said in private. Someone else is exposing who really started the whole thing. Screenshots and receipts are getting shared to prove they had less involvement than others. What they don't realize is that they're building the case against themselves with their own hands. Every time they turn on each other, another exhibit gets added to heaven's file. Every accusation they throw at a former ally is another piece of evidence. They think they're defending themselves, but they're actually confessing, admitting to schemes, confirming plots, validating everything heaven already knew. And you know what's driving everyone crazy? They can feel the weight of this courtroom, even though they can't see it. A sense exists that something is watching, recording, measuring. That's why panic is spreading. That's why they can't sleep. That's why they're turning on each other with such intensity. Guilty people always eat their own when judgment feels close. They're trying to escape the same courtroom they confidently dragged you into. The panic isn't just about getting caught. It's about realizing they were never in control to begin with. Heaven didn't just protect you. God exposed them by law, and now the case is unfolding publicly, slowly, strategically. Because divine justice doesn't need noise, it just needs truth, and truth is loud enough without saying a word. You didn't have to defend yourself in their court of public opinion. You were already vindicated in the court that actually matters, and that courtroom doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't lose cases. It doesn't acquit the guilty or condemn the innocent, which means everything they did is going to come back with legal precision. They were so convinced they were justified, so sure that tearing you down was necessary. In their minds, they built a whole case against you based on offense, jealousy, insecurity, and assumptions. They hyped each other up, rehearsed the lies, rehearsed the reactions, and moved like everything was going to fall perfectly into place. But there was one thing they didn't bother to check: whether heaven had approved the hit. And heaven didn't approve. That's where they messed up. Because in the spiritual realm, coming for someone God has marked brings consequences. Just because their egos were hurt doesn't mean they were appointed to attack. Just because offense happened doesn't mean they were authorized to destroy. But they acted like judge, jury, and executioner, when in reality they were nothing more than angry spectators who got too bold and stepped into a role that wasn't theirs. They didn't just act without permission. They moved against God's decision. And when you come against what heaven has already sealed, you're not just fighting a person, you're fighting the will of God. That's why everything started unraveling the moment they launched their plan, not slowly, violently. Miscommunication started spreading. Trust broke in critical places. People who once whispered behind your back in unity now whisper against each other with even more venom. The plan failed because the foundation was ego, not divine instruction. This wasn't spiritual warfare. They made it personal warfare, and God doesn't back that. They weren't correcting you. They were projecting their insecurities onto you, and heaven saw through all of it. So when they started to move, it wasn't you who pushed back, it was God who said, "Not on my watch." Watch what's happening now because of their unauthorized attack. The person who was most vocal about your flaws is now being exposed for having the exact same issues, but worse. The one who accused you of being fake is being revealed as the biggest pretender in the group. The one who said manipulation was your game is now being called out for controlling everyone's narrative. It's like heaven is holding up a mirror to each person, showing them that everything they accused you of is actually their own reflection. That's what happens when you attack without authorization. Accusations boomerang, judgments reverse, criticisms come home. Their alliances weren't real, they were built in delusion, and when the hand of God blocked the move, they couldn't accept that they were out of line. So instead of repenting, they started turning on each other, looking for someone to blame for why it all went wrong. Your energy was off from the beginning. I never fully trusted you. You were always jealous of me too. You really wanted to be the leader. You made this about yourself. Notice something. Those are the exact same accusations they made about you. They're recycling the same script, just changing the names. That's because wounded ego always repeats the same patterns. The truth is, it didn't go wrong from their perspective. It was never going to go right, because ego authorized the attack, not God, and heaven dismantles anything that ego builds in the name of pride. What they're experiencing now is the consequence of moving without clearance, and instead of learning from it, they're doubling down, attacking each other with the same venom they used on you, which only proves they learned nothing. And heaven sees that too. You didn't need to fight back. You didn't need to expose them. You didn't even need to raise your voice. Your very presence was a disruption. You walked in truth, and that truth irritated their demons. It wasn't because you were loud, it was because you were clear, and that clarity acted like a mirror, reflecting everything they tried to hide, even from themselves. They couldn't handle the way your energy exposed them without you saying a word. You didn't call them out, but being around you made them feel called out. You didn't accuse them, but next to your light, their shadows started squirming, and instead of facing their own mess, they turned on each other, desperate to find someone to blame for why their manipulation didn't work, why their lies weren't landing, why their smear campaigns kept falling apart. You weren't attacking them, you were revealing them just by being consistent, just by staying grounded, just by not reacting, and that was more than they could stand. They couldn't destroy the reflection, so they tried to break the mirror. But you're not just any mirror. You're a God-forged reflection of everything they hate about truth. When they couldn't shatter you, when they couldn't twist your image into something they could control, pressure started boiling between them. One person blamed another for going too easy on you. Someone else started saying, "You didn't do your part." The group that once moved like a unit suddenly turned chaotic because the plan wasn't working and nobody wanted to take responsibility. Every quality they attacked in you is now showing up magnified in them. They called you proud. Now they're accusing each other of arrogance. They said you were divisive. Now their group is divided beyond repair. They claimed you were manipulative. Now they're all pointing fingers about who manipulated whom. The mirror doesn't lie. And when you're a divine mirror, you don't just reflect surface-level stuff. You reflect soul-level truth. That's why being around you made them so uncomfortable. You weren't doing anything to them. They were just seeing themselves clearly for the first time and hating what they saw. And instead of changing what the mirror showed, they tried to break the mirror. But you can't break what God forged. So now they're stuck looking at each other and seeing the same uncomfortable truths, the same insecurities, the same brokenness, the same pride, and it's tearing them apart because they can't escape it. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random, and if you're paying attention, you can feel it. Their walls are closing in, so let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your destiny engine for $1 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. You know what the tragedy is. If they had used you as a mirror for growth, healing could have occurred. If they had asked themselves why your peace bothered them so much, they might have discovered their own lack of peace. If they had examined why your confidence triggered them, they might have faced their own insecurity, but instead of using the mirror to see themselves clearly and change, they tried to destroy the mirror. And when that didn't work, they started destroying each other. Their egos couldn't handle the fact that your strength didn't come from pride or power, it came from purity. That's why they couldn't touch it, that's why it didn't crack. And now, instead of celebrating your downfall, they're choking on their own egos, trying to figure out who failed, who cracked, who backed out. But the truth is, none of them could dim what heaven already amplified, and now they're stuck in a mess of their own making, furious that the mirror's still standing, clean, unbothered, and still reflecting exactly what they've been running from. Every time they look at each other now, they see reflections of their own worst qualities, and that's driving them mad, because you were supposed to be the problem. But it turns out, they were always their own problem. You just reflected it back so clearly they couldn't deny it anymore. They thought they were slick. They thought nobody would find out. They believed their whispers in dark corners, their passive-aggressive digs, their behind-the-scenes sabotage would stay neatly hidden. But what they didn't realize is when you conjure a storm against someone God has covered, that storm doesn't just backfire, it boomerangs. They came together like spiritual arsonists, mixing jealousy, lies and fake smiles like ingredients in a toxic brew. But God was already ahead of them. The very thing they tried to conjure for your destruction got scrambled at the source. The plan had holes in it before it even launched. They thought they were in control, but they were actually walking into a divine setup. Every secret they shared in those late-night gossip circles is unraveling now. And the wild part is the exposure isn't coming from outsiders. It's coming from inside the group. The same mouths that vowed to stay loyal are now slipping under pressure. The same hands that helped stir the pot are now pointing fingers. That's not coincidence. That's divine interference. God didn't just protect you, He embarrassed them with precision. The rumors they spread about you are now being spread about them. But worse, the isolation they tried to create around you is now their reality. The reputation damage they attempted to inflict on you has landed on their heads with twice the impact. Each person is trying to distance themselves from the storm they collectively created. One is saying they were never really part of it. Another is claiming they tried to stop it but got overruled. Nobody wants to own what they built together. The power structure is collapsing. Now they're all in survival mode because the storm they created has turned their safe house into a war zone. They didn't just lose the battle against you, they're losing each other, and you aren't even in the middle of it. You were never supposed to fight this storm. It was always going to fold in on itself, because when God marks someone, even the most organized wickedness can't survive the fallout, and this storm is falling apart from the inside, one leak at a time. You weren't in their lives by accident. You were sent as a test, not to punish, not to provoke, but to reveal. God placed you in that path to expose what was truly in their hearts. How they treated you on the surface wasn't what mattered. What your presence pulled out of them was the real issue. Would they choose integrity? Would they check their pride? Would they choose humility when faced with someone chosen, favored, or simply different? They didn't. Instead of growing, they competed. Instead of healing, they hated. Instead of reflecting, they retaliated. Everything they hadn't dealt with got triggered by you. Insecurity, jealousy, control, resentment, and instead of using the opportunity to grow up, they decided to double down. They went full serpent. They gossiped. They manipulated. They schemed like it was a game they were guaranteed to win. But God never sends a test without also setting a timer, and when that timer hit 0, the test turned into judgment. The very same energy they used to attack you became the weapon that tore their lives apart. Not instantly, but surgically. One by one, their masks started slipping. Jobs started falling through. Friendships started collapsing. Secrets started spilling. The peace they once faked turned into full-blown paranoia. They failed because they thought it was about you, but it was never about you. You were the mirror, the revealer, the divine checkpoint. Everyone got the same exam, but now they're blaming each other for different answers. One person is saying they told everyone to back off. Another is claiming they knew it wouldn't work but went along anyway. Someone else is swearing they were sabotaged by the group. They can't even agree on what the test was, let alone why they failed it. And watch what happens when people fail a test they don't understand. They start accusing the teacher of being unfair. That's exactly what they're doing with you. Some are saying you must have done something to them spiritually. Others claim you had help from dark forces. A few are convinced you manipulated reality somehow. None of them can accept the simple truth that they just failed a character test. You know what the test really was. It was simple. When confronted with someone walking in genuine peace and purpose, will you celebrate it or try to destroy it? When you see someone who has what you want, will you learn from them or attack them? When faced with your own reflection in someone else's light, will you grow or will you rage? They chose rage. They chose destruction. They chose attack. And that told heaven everything it needed to know about where they really were spiritually. Not where they claimed to be, not where they appeared to be on the surface, but where they actually were in their hearts. Their reaction to you told heaven everything it needed to know. God was watching, not just what they did to your face, but how they moved when they thought nobody would hold them accountable. And when the test results came back, they were damning. Now they're panicking, not because they feel guilty, but because the damage is starting to show. And instead of owning it, they're pointing fingers at each other. You went too far. You started it. You made me believe the lies. The same unity they once had in harming you has shattered under the weight of spiritual failure. Deep down, they know they failed something important. They can feel it. Even if they can't articulate it, there's a knowing in their spirit that they missed a major opportunity. They could have been blessed by your presence. They could have learned from your peace. They could have been inspired by your resilience. But instead they chose to be threatened by it. And that choice, that response to the test, has consequences beyond just your situation. Because when you fail a divine test, you don't just lose that opportunity, you often disqualify yourself from the next level God was trying to take you to. And God didn't have to strike them down with fire. All he had to do was remove the grace, and their whole house of cards collapsed. What's holding them together now? Nothing. What's protecting them from each other? Nothing. What's keeping their secrets safe? Nothing. Because when you fail the test, you lose the grace, and without grace, everything built on lies falls apart. They were counting on your collapse. They expected you to break down, lose control, snap, or at least shrink under the weight of all that silent toxicity they kept releasing. You know the kind. Backhanded compliments, fake concern, strategic isolation, lies passed off as warnings. It wasn't always loud, but it was constant. They kept pouring out emotional and spiritual radiation like they were trying to contaminate your peace. But what they didn't know is that God already made you immune. You weren't just protected externally, you were internally fortified, covered from the inside out. What they thought would seep into your soul never even got past your spirit. They expected to see you fall apart. Instead, you stood steady, unbothered, untouched. Not because you didn't feel it, but because heaven had already detoxed you from needing their validation. They're getting sick with the same energy they were trying to infect you with. The anxiety, the bitterness, the exhaustion. They thought you'd fade. Instead, you've only gotten brighter, and you became proof that some people are simply untouchable when heaven seals them in purpose. The stress they tried to put on you is now manifesting in their bodies. They can't sleep. Their health is declining. Their mental state is deteriorating. When you try to poison someone God is protecting, that poison has to go somewhere. Spiritual law says what you send out comes back. They're blaming each other for how sick they feel. Nobody's connecting the dots that they did this to themselves by trying to do it to you. The exact symptoms they wanted for you are now their daily reality. And while they're choking on what they released, you're walking in clarity, protected by grace, glowing like you walked out of the fire untouched. When God seals you, even nuclear hearts can't contaminate you, but they can definitely contaminate each other. And that's exactly what's happening right now. They were playing with fire they had no business touching. Some of them went deeper than gossip. They started dabbling in spiritual manipulation, energy work, frequencies and rituals they didn't fully understand. They mixed ancient language with modern ignorance, all while trying to tap into realms they weren't prepared for. And the most dangerous part is they actually believed they had power. They thought they were controlling the atmosphere. They thought their intentions were enough to bend reality. But spiritual law doesn't work like that. Rules exist, boundaries exist, and when someone is covered by heaven, no energy, no incantation, no spiritual shortcut can override that divine order. What they saw as harmless practices were actually unauthorized breaches. Their obsession with harming you spiritually ended up opening doors they can't close. They called down powers that didn't just refuse to obey them. Those powers turned against them. Rituals backfired. Manifestations twisted. The things they tried to conjure started touching them instead. They didn't just lose access to you. They lost access to peace. Now they can't sleep right. Their energy feels off. Their spirits feel heavy. God was watching the whole time, and he never gave clearance. So the moment they moved without permission, the response was instant, but invisible. Strange things are occurring in their lives, and they can't explain it. Nightmares that feel too real, coincidences that seem orchestrated, timing that's working against them in ways that defy logic. They open doors they can't close, and this is creating massive paranoia within the group. One person is convinced another sent something negative their way. Someone else thinks they're being spiritually attacked by a former ally. A third is certain that the rituals they did together are now backfiring on everyone. When you try to curse someone heaven has blessed, you don't just fail. You invoke a response from the kingdom you're trying to violate. Every incantation they spoke over you was heard by heaven. Every ritual they performed was recorded. Every intention they set was noted. Now they're paranoid, suspicious, broken in places they can't explain. They're turning on each other. One person is saying they shouldn't have gone that deep. Another is claiming they were pressured into participating. Someone else is trying to reverse what got done but doesn't know how. But the truth is, the backlash didn't come from each other, it came from above. Heaven was in override mode from the beginning, and what they called power was actually rebellion disguised as control. And now they're left confused, drained and divided because they reached into a realm they had no business touching, trying to curse someone who was already marked as uncursable. You were chosen to awaken what's hidden, to force what's buried, to rise to the surface. Not to shame them, but to show them. Instead of learning from the light, they chose to fight it, and that's why they're crumbling. What started as a confident attempt to tear you down ended in divine exposure nobody saw coming. You never had to lift a finger. You let God handle it, and He rewrote the whole narrative in your favor. Heaven's hand was on you the entire time. Your survival was their unraveling. Your peace was their punishment. Your protection was the proof that Heaven's signature will always cancel out hell's schemes. If you're wondering why it all happened, because you were being revealed, promoted, fortified, God used their plot as the platform to show who you really are and who they really were. And now, with the dust settling and masks dropped, you're walking away not just victorious but transformed. They're left dealing with consequences. You're stepping into clarity, elevation, and divine restoration. The very trap they built to break you became the bridge God used to bless you. They turned on each other. You turned the page. They operated in ego. You operated under Heaven's protection. The weapon turned on its wielder. The sacrifice was denied. The mirror wouldn't shatter. The storm boomeranged. The test was failed. Heaven sealed you where you were the protected, never the prosecuted. Your story is still unfolding, and it's getting good. Because chosen ones don't just survive plots. You dominate outcomes. You're not recovering from what they did. You're rising because of what God did. That's divine security clearance. That's what it looks like when Heaven won't let them touch you.